Welcome to the Touchlines and Touchdowns video rant cast thing. I am your host, Asa, aka the Twig. I am here with my esteemed, I'm going to say co-host at this point, Kevin, who doesn't believe in the internet, despite us being currently on the internet. This is not brought to you by anybody because this is a YouTube series and we don't have sponsors for our YouTube. So if you would like to sponsor our YouTube, please reach out. We can be found at that, or you can like, subscribe, whatever in the YouTube thing. I'm my cadence here is podcasting. But Kevin, I could be wrong, but I think we have a game coming up.
Oh, we do. The probably the best chance that MLS has had to exercise a lot of demons and disappointment. Which really all that does is it just builds an even grander stage from which our hopes and dreams can crash and fall to the ground from.
And what is sports if not just an opportunity to be upset?
Given my rooting interest profile between the Detroit teams. Now, granted, the Red Wings, they had their era of excellence.
That was fun for a while.
Yeah, but between my Detroit sports teams, Michigan State sports, which although can be very good, like truly tasting. It's not like I'm not from Boston. I didn't grow up where it's like, I was winning a championship.
It's overrated
every other year.
Yeah. No. So the whole Boston thing, like, remember when they were like, oh, we never win anything. Y'all had the Celtics. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it from Boston. Like, you had a bad decade, right? The 90s, like where they didn't win a ton. And then in the 2000s, you had the Patriots. In the 80s, you had the Celtics. 2010s, you had the Patriots still. I don't want to hear it from Boston. Detroit has had one competent program. I'm going to say program in the last 30 years.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the Tigers
Pistons.
Pistons,
they had their windows, but the Tigers did a very Detroit thing by snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, where they had these loaded lineups and they spent like crazy and still nothing won. But anyways, all that is to say, it has prepared me well for the constant stream of disappointment that I've experienced in CONCACAF Champions League.
So to be clear here, obviously we are in fact Detroit born, bred, whatever. So our soccer fandom, as it relates to MLS, is general. Because we didn't even have a USL championship team until 2 years ago. DCFC, suck it, Columbus. We're just generally opposed to the city of Columbus now that friend of the pod, Jonathan, no longer lives there. Columbus, not a great place. Actually, it's very fun. I don't know if you've ever spent time in Columbus. It's actually a very fun little town.
I did for a Michigan-Ohio State football game wearing Michigan gear, so probably not the best lens through which to experience that.
I wouldn't have done it like that.
I'll go back in a bit more neutral setting and
go for a U.S. men's national team game, because apparently they only have games in Ohio for reasons that are very clear, but we can't talk about because we avoid politics and race on this podcast. It's because they don't want to go to diverse areas. Because we're really concerned about Moroccan fans taking over the stadium.
I wish that we could play. It'd be an oxymoron to place your send-off games internationally. I understand that. It's not lost on me, but given our track record playing on the road under Berhalter, I wish that we were doing all of our World Cup prep on a different continent, just from a sporting standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. But here we are again. We have CONCACAF Champions League. So as Detroit fans, we don't have proper MLS teams, right? So the MLS teams that I'm a Galaxy fan because I live in Los Angeles now, and I was able to just sort of adopt a new one because I didn't have to lose anything. I have claimed to be a Los Angeles Chargers fan for 3 years. 3 years I've claimed to be a Chargers fan. I'm not. I'm a Lions fan. You can't get rid of it. It's part of you. It's the reason why I was a Michigan State fan despite going to Michigan. At a certain point, it's just who you
can't
are.
Fight it.
So a lot of Detroit soccer fans, I guess, we became sort of, we're certainly U.S. men's national team fans, but we're also like just sort of like general MLS fans. Which is like, do you remember that Rob Lowe meme where he was just wearing an NFL hat?
Yeah.
He's like fan of league. We're actually fans of the MLS. So like Sounders being good is not like an offensive thing to me, because it's like, well, you know, until I had the Galaxy, it was just like, I don't know, beat Liga MX.
Right. And that's really what it comes down to. I do skew, even when I was living in Michigan, if I had to pick an MLS team, it would be the Sounders. Now, granted, that was because I was a Dempsey fan. I liked Jordan Morris, especially early on in his
pre-injury
career.
Jordan Morris.
It's fun.
Yeah, maybe it's because like U.S. men's national team Twitter has grown up since his injury. But I feel like people don't realize how exciting he was.
Oh yeah, he scored that early goal against Mexico. He was a prospect when our player pool had no prospects of note or excitement, and generally just an aging player pool.
And he was weird because he was like, I think he was the last gasp of the college can produce players era, right? Like he was like the Heisman or whatever that soccer Heisman is, from Stanford. So we were like, oh, like maybe our system can work. It can.
That it's going to be increasingly difficult to, especially as like the academy system in the U.S. really like matures out. There's just additional layers of filtering that players have to go through.
I think like one to two players a year can probably come out of college and be useful. Ben Bender looks like a guy for Charlotte. Daryl DK obviously came through college, but you know, you're not going to be like, it's not going to be like how it used to be where it was like, you know, you had serious players and, you know, in the 5th or 6th spot of the draft.
The model, it seems like youth development in this country is heading towards is players who are truly worthwhile are going to be sold to European clubs by the time they're old enough to go to college.
Right.
And I'm all for that. That sounds lovely.
Yeah, I'm good with it. I would be totally fine with that. But going back to sort of Sounders, they do have one of those players who we talked about, right? Like they have that 16-year-old who probably should be in high school, let alone college, who's not going to be long, I think, for MLS. I don't think Obed Vargas is going to be here past his 18th.
Yeah, I think
depending on his contract.
Yeah, so I don't know when he signed through. I'm almost certain from a work permit standpoint, he'll have to be 18 to move to Europe.
Yeah, unless he has a passport, but I don't know.
I believe both of his parents are from Mexico and grew up in Alaska, so I don't think that he has like a European in.
Yeah, but there's weird stuff where you can be like, well, Alaska was part of Russia, right?
Exactly.
Therefore, because I have a buddy who born in America, lived in America. His parents are from America, but because of like some weird Portuguese law, he has Portuguese citizenship because his family got kicked out of Portugal like 600 years ago.
Maybe. I do remember after, I want to say it was the first leg against Leon earlier in Champions League, and that was Obed's, like that was the first game we like really showed up on the scene for like, wow, like this guy's very poised for being, you know, he just got his driver's license. Yeah. And Brian Schmetzer in like a post game interview or like a day or two after made some comment about, oh yeah, he's like a huge talent and, you know, people are going to start taking notice of him. And he made this nod that, or even some of the bigger clubs in Mexico, as if selling him on to, I don't know, Monterrey or Tigres or America is something that could be in his future. Not sure there, but he's a great academy product to have, especially considering the way that you kind of, if you want to build a top heavy roster to compete with clubs from Mexico, having your depth filled out with academy players that are hitting your salary cap for like $50K at a time, or whatever he's on. Those deals aren't generally that
no, but imagine if you were getting paid $50,000 at the age of 16.
Right. And I think it's either like 50 or maybe it's like 62 now is like the league minimum. But a lot of those guys pretty quickly will like graduate off that. Like I think even like Benuhu is another example. I think he's making like barely six figures right now, and it's like this is the Cameroon International that the internet was going crazy about with this game against Egypt. So there's just some for the inefficiencies that MLS roster rules create. Seattle in this like very specific moment in time has hit some absolute home runs in like the inefficient areas you need to do well in to round out a roster that's deep.
And it's funny because like people love talking about Moneyball in other sports, but the place where it actually is the most useful is MLS because the rules are so weird that you do actually have to find inefficiencies. One of those inefficiencies, for example, is probably getting two brothers who really, really want to play with each other on probably sweetheart deals. Like I can't imagine Christian and Alex are getting the top dollar. So there you go.
They're not. Alex's contract. So if there's like like MLS player salaries. There's what's it called? It's MLSplayers.org, and you can actually look up by player. So the Roldan brothers are on. So Christian is on he's making like $880K a year, which is still probably a sweetheart deal considering the fact that he occupies a domestic player spot. He's at the very least like a rotational or a fringe national team guy. And his MLS production is very, very good and does a lot of stuff well.
I mean, he's an MLS MVP candidate year in, year out for the last couple of years at least.
If he was born in Argentina and was playing the way that he is at the age that he is, he'd be a DP here. And then here's
Kevin Cabral is a DP.
Right.
That's all I'm going to say about that as it relates to Christian.
Even Zardes, who's another U.S. national team player, he was on a huge contract with the Crew, and you can make a lot of arguments about who does more to win. But the sweetheart deal really is Alex Roldan, El Salvadorian international, making $93,000 a year.
So if you're keeping track at home, Alex Roldan is making less money than like a 10-year union guy at a Ford plant.
Right.
The UAW does a better job than the MLS Players Association, if you're wondering.
And he's generally included on positional rankings. He's like probably a top 5 right back in the league. So
I mean it's no question. Weirdly, although now that I think about it, I was going to go through like the top 5 right backs in the league, and a lot of them, I think 3 of the top 5 play on the West Coast.
Yeah.
Araujo probably gets a little more of the benefit of the doubt than he should, but Hollingshead, I think, is easily.
Yeah, and Hollingshead generally is thought of as just being like the guy. Even when he was at Dallas, he was pretty good. But yeah, Seattle's, they have this window right now where Ladero's seemingly back and healthy. You're never going to get like that first year that Ladero came into the league. His sheer volume of influence on play was like unbelievable. Like the dude touched the ball like every minute he could, and
I mean you got to appreciate it. That type of player like is so useful for just like it's like a point guard who like demands the ball at the beginning of the set, and it's just like the cadence of how it's going to go. We've talked on the podcast a lot about like the nature of the 6, but like it makes sense why you would want that type of distributing 6, like Jackson Ewell, if he could do it, or Michael Bradley when he did do it. Like it's so useful to be like, okay, get the ball to the 6, and then we can start our flow, as opposed to what our national team does now, which is, I
don't know. I don't know what it is that they do necessarily.
I don't have a good answer to that now.
Yeah. That was the year I think Seattle started. They were had a terrible start to the year. They signed Ladero and completely flipped it and went on an absolute tear in that 2016 season. But he's right at the edge of where it's like, okay, how productive is he going to be? They brought in Rusnak. And all this, the point of all of this is to say, within the lens of what's possible within MLS, at least on paper, seemingly they're about as productive and as well balanced a team as you could hope for. They're a little thin at center back, and they're always an injury away from having to make some tougher choices. But if you can, a true first choice, Seattle has a ton of international caliber players in it. Their DPs have all generally hit, especially with Rusnak playing almost as I don't know if he's not even really an 8. They almost play him in a dual pivot next to João Paulo, and it's just worked out. And this is a Champions League facing podcast or video chat. And the reason that all this is important is because of all these weird roster rules and just literally the timing of when do you sign a player. That's another issue that people have taken with Champions League is, oh, well, generally if you win MLS Cup, your role players and rotational players did so well that other teams are going to step up and give them comp bumps, and you just can't retain your guys. Like it's very atypical for a club that qualifies for Champions League to have to turn their rosters over.
Right. So like we talk about it a lot, or we have talked about it a lot rather, is that like a big issue that people sort of don't recognize is that the cadence of the other Champions League, right? Like the UEFA Champions League, right? It makes sense with the schedule of the year, right? Like it starts at the beginning of the year, it ends at the end of the year. The MLS or the CONCACAF Champions League doesn't. It's almost like inverts it. Like imagine having to play the biggest 2 games of your schedule in the first half of your season. And that's what Seattle is looking at. So like there is no summer window or in the case of the UEFA situation, the January window to like shore some stuff up.
Yeah, this year the timing worked out, and I think it's because of the World Cup influenced MLS starting earlier this year, and that created some crazy early season games, and they're playing constantly in the snow in New England.
Always fun.
Yeah, but this year more so than previous years, MLS teams were a bit deeper into their regular season when they had to start playing these games, whereas most years for Champions League, I want to say that first round is actually normally preseason.
Yeah.
Whereas the clubs from Mexico, because of how their schedule is like stacked and they do a true summer break, which makes total sense. They're normally a bit more like in form. Now it all starts to come out in the wash. Like if you can advance past like that first and second round, at a certain point, you start to lose the whole like, oh, MLS clubs are in like preseason form. Like once you've played like a month and a half of your like regular season games, like that excuse doesn't hold as much weight with me as it does if you're playing these games in February and the MLS season doesn't start until the 3rd week of March.
Well, I mean, I'm not as concerned about form as I am about like cadence of year, right? Like I just think it's super weird. And look, like we're not going to talk about the sins of MLS here. You know, there's a lot of them. But like, I'm not going to get into the fact that like the schedule doesn't make sense. Like,
yeah.
Like it makes sense if you decided to build a whole bunch of stadiums outdoors. But you know, it wasn't necessary, right? Like it wasn't necessary for Minnesota to build an outdoor stadium. It wasn't.
Yeah, and it is a trick. I've like tried to think through how you can fight the weather with doing. How could you change the MLS season to better fit like the traditional like a European calendar? You also run into the issue where, as far as like diversity of climate goes, for a single league where you could have teams playing in Minnesota or in upstate in northern New England in March, and then having that same team then have to play in Texas and South Florida in July and August. Yeah. Like it's tough and like trying to balance a schedule where we don't have teams that are like, oh well, you know, if you're south of the Mason-Dixon line, you're playing all of your home games before like, you know, May 15th. Then after that, like all the games are in the north. Like, yes, okay, that would like improve the you know, the conditions on the field probably, but that's just is even more nonsensical than what we do now.
To me, I just think that like MLS needs to tell its clubs like, look, like, and like it's too late for some of them, right? Like obviously, like, you know, Cincinnati just built a new stadium. Mm-hmm. I think Nashville is far enough south that you can roll with 30 degrees. It's fine.
Yeah.
But like the fact that Minnesota built an outdoor stadium, you know, like or is playing in an outdoor stadium.
Yeah.
New England doesn't have a stadium. I just want to point that out. Like you should be encouraging your teams to have indoor stadiums. And look, like if we're, Miami can have an outdoor stadium paid for somehow. We'll see about what happens there. But like, if you're Miami, why wouldn't you make this stadium indoors? Like, what benefit is there from having an outdoor stadium where you're playing games? Look, we play over the summer in this country. What benefit is there to Miami to playing in August outside? As any team who goes down to South Florida to play a football game in early September, how much fun that is.
Right. I'm curious too, like at the scale of MLS stadiums, how costly a retractable roof option would be. So obviously, like Mercedes-Benz is it is an engineering like marvel, but it's also a massive stadium. If you can shrink the footprint of the facility quite a bit, like I'm curious what you could do with even it just helps keep it. It's not going to be like in a perfect air conditioned environment, or in the north a perfect heated environment, but if you can like take the edge off of whatever the elements are throwing at you, like that'd be helpful.
Well, so I mean, there are ways to do it, right? It's just a question of commitment, and like, are you willing to commit the resources to do what you need to do? But all I'll say about this is that if you had a stadium of 25,000, right, it doesn't need to be 50,000. It doesn't need to be 65,000. Right. You put together a stadium of 30,000, 35,000. That's not a huge footprint, right? Like it's not a district. Like you don't have to do the whole thing and redesign a city. You can throw, like, you think about what happened with like with Little Caesars Arena in Detroit, right? And getting rid of the Joe. Like, would it have, if Detroit were to get an MLS team, would it be that hard to find some place in Detroit to accommodate a $30,000 or 30,000 person, 25,000 person stadium? I don't think so. And look, we're a little off track because Seattle has a great stadium and it's not actually a problem. And Marshawn Lynch tells you to fill it out, but
that's right. I've enjoyed that.
That was great. That was deeply fun.
Yeah.
But like that's sort of, we have a issues with MLS episode coming soon apparently. But what are your thoughts sort of about this game specifically, right?
Yep. So a lot of the issues, or a lot of the things that people have pointed to over the last, all right, so my like MLS fandom really probably ratcheted up like 6 or 7 years ago. And since then I've actually really enjoyed the Champions League because it is the true measuring stick outside of like the closed system in which you operate in. Because you can talk about all these things like, player investment goes up and facilities are better, play on the fields, blah, blah. A lot of that are also, it's like subjective in a sense, whereas like if you're beating teams from a league that was objectively or still is or has been objectively better than yours on a more consistent basis, but that's like measurements. You can measure that improvement.
Right.
And it has been up until really that like Toronto run in 2018, and that was like a year or two after like the whole GAM and TAM thing were introduced to try to like make the rosters not so tab heavy. Prior to that, MLS's roster, or like record against Liga MX is like horrid. It is more tolerable now, with most of the losses coming actually to like Tigres and Monterrey. If you like throw out those two teams, like they've been playing kind of on par with Mexican clubs. Last year was a bit of a disaster, but things that have been pointed to as being like the big issues of why we just can't compete. A lot of it is around player spend or player value. And for, I don't know if the 2022 season results have like been like publicized in this way yet, but for 2021, both through that players got salary guide that I referenced earlier for MLS and some things that were released for Liga MX, you're able to get like a feel for, okay, how much are teams actually spending on player salaries? And the gap is actually not that big.
It's a funny thing. Like people talk about this a lot, but like MLS actually does spend. They just spend stupidly.
Yep. It is the inefficiencies that we talked about where you end up cramming a lot of money into a few specific players when unfortunately like it's kind of a weak link sport, and you've got to put 11 on the field and you've got to have like really 18 to get through a season. And if you want to start playing in more competitions, the number goes up.
Right.
Whereas this also, there was a lot of Twitter back and forth with like Paul Tenorio, and I think MLS Buzz was doing some of it where they were breaking down. There's like 4 clubs in MLS that are spending over $20 million a year in normalized salaries, which I think is meant to include like both player salaries and also like transfer fees paid. And they're like, where does this spend stack compared to other leagues?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you'd be like top 3, I think, in like the Dutch league, and in France you'd be like 12. Like there are clubs spending dollars on teams that should in theory place them in spots around the world that probably most people wouldn't really think would make sense.
Right.
And on the Mexican side of things, there are the big spending clubs: Tigres, Monterrey, Club America. Cruz Azul spends money. Pumas is not a team that spends money. Their like annual roster spend, if I remember correctly, is like $8 million USD.
Which is like the cost of a Zlatan.
Yeah, well, it's so if you take into consideration, like if a team spends all of their GAM and doesn't touch a designated player spot, I want to say that their spend ends up being like 8.5 or like $9 million in MLS.
Yeah.
So they're spending on their roster about what the Rapids spend on their roster. So that really like
it's not good. Just for our listeners, like you don't want to be at Kroenke levels outside of our
no, and there are that team is playing extremely well. They're very well coached, and there's certainly like a mental edge to this competition as well, and being able to play well in Mexico versus playing well in the States, because that has been an issue before. We'll get like a draw or a 1-goal result at home, and you go down for the second leg feeling good, and you get absolutely housed. I mean, look at the Revs. The Revs had the Pumas down and beaten.
Right.
Yeah, they were up 3-0 going into the road leg, and then Buxa, oddly enough, a guy who's a full Polish international, misses like 2 pretty good opportunities on the road. Like that could have finished the series, and who knows if they would have figured it out with Cruz Azul, but maybe we'd be talking about like an all MLS final. But the spending gap isn't as, especially with the clubs that were in this year's competition, you can't point to spend. The other thing that people will point to is, MLS teams, they spend too much money on young prospects out of South America. And 2 years ago, I thought that was the wave of the future. But after watching a lot of swing and misses recently by Atlanta, there may be a slightly more like balanced approach that needs to be taken there.
Well, what I wonder about, just sort of on that point, is that we've seen sort of the types of DPs who are sort of young South American internationals, or young, in the case of Galaxy, French international, and they don't seem to work out all that well, right? Like we're not like, it's funny because like we want to think of ourselves, MLS, as a development league, but we're not really. We're a place where a second tier player, either at the end of their career or at the beginning of their career, can come and do a lot of really good things because there's time, right? So like if you have a guy who say is playing really, really well in, I don't know, second Bundesliga, right? He's not necessarily going to come in and light the MLS on fire because it's such a different game. But if you have someone who you see like is has, when he has time on the ball, is a killer, but it's just like the game is too fast for him, MLS is the league for him.
He fits well.
Right.
Yeah. And I think those, like the Almiron signing from Atlanta, people have like conflated. Almiron was a bit further on in his career when they bought him, compared to fair or not, they're always going to compare Barco to Almiron. Barco is
you have to.
You have to, and like he was 18 years old. Yes, he was like successful for Independiente, won Sudamericana before he came up here. But they're also like very different players, and that just like didn't work out. The PD Martinez thing, I'll never understand how that didn't directly translate, because again, he was a finished product almost at that point. Just couldn't figure it out. But Seattle has never spent like that. They spend their money. So Ladero, when they bought him, I want to say it was like 26 or 27. Rui Diaz, about the same age. Yeah. Ladero's on, I think he's 32 now. Rusnak is late prime age. He's their third DP. They have always bought to win, and it looks like now they may end up getting those sell-on opportunities coming through their academy. I mean, Obed Vargas is, I think, an exceptional prospect, but even then, they've got a couple of kids a few years older than him who at least our rotational players, like they're serviceable for the league. And then they have, I guess they just won that U17 tournament as well. So there's a couple more kids coming up. But Seattle's roster is built to win now, and they've spent more money than the team that they're playing. So like a lot of these arguments about, oh, the roster quality isn't there. And also objectively, like if you go, there's only so many data points you can gather from the internet. Another one is transfer market. Now transfer market skews player values up the younger you are. Depending on the league that you're in, their algorithm will treat you differently. But they have a generally more valuable and more accomplished roster than Pumas. Like there's all of these like quantitative data points.
And you can even be qualitative about it, right? Like you can look up and down the rosters and look, if this was Club America, I would not be saying what I'm about to say. If this was Cruz Azul even, or but Pumas, you don't look at their guys and say like, oh crap.
Right.
Like that's a guy we're going to have to scheme around. Whereas with Sounders, like they're maybe one, maybe two, depending on how they're playing. So I think that like, if you look at this, you said at the sort of the top of this show, like this is probably the best MLS chance we've had since that Toronto run. What was it? 2018.
Yep.
And somebody needs to do it first, right? Like that's and not first. I mean, I guess what Galaxy won like 20 years ago or 22 years ago.
Yeah, it's like a different format. I think it was all played in the U.S. You can't really count that.
No. In the proper like CONCACAF Champions League era, this is it. This is the first time, and somebody needs to do it first. And what I wonder, here's what I wonder, if we're going to talk about like the implications of things sort of going forward. I wonder if you have a situation where a couple of times Champions League goes MLS's way. If Liga MX starts to more seriously consider that merger, that creates two different leagues, which from my perspective, and I think I've been pretty vocal about this, is what we need. We need to create this sort of super league, so to speak, because then you get into a situation where Mexican fans in America are watching American teams, because that's right. Like that's the biggest potential for the health of American domestic player pool, is that you have Mexican players or Mexican fans, Mexican American fans. That second generation, it's like their dad, let's say their dad and mom or their family were big Cruz Azul fans. Well, twice a year or once a year they get to see Cruz Azul. But okay, they went to a game at I don't know. Let's use it in Colorado, right? They go to a game and it's like, oh, this is fun. Dad, can we go to another game? It's like, well, yeah. I mean, Cruz Azul is not coming, but maybe Club America is. That'll be fun. Great. And then suddenly you go to 5 or 6 games as a 6 or 7-year-old at the Rapids, and you're like, well, I'm a Rapids fan, right? Like at a certain point, you're just a Rapids fan.
The future of these two leagues is inevitably going to be more and more entwined, especially as the on the field product gets closer to par with the on field product that the Mexican clubs have been putting out for a long time. And I mean, this is all like hopeful, forward looking discussion. The rule is, as Andrew Wiebe always like iterated, the disappointment is the free space. Like there's a great chance that Seattle goes down. They have not looked good. They just choked away a game at San Jose. Like they're not on this like killer run of form in league play. Now, granted, maybe their head's elsewhere. There's a great chance that they go down there and Pumas, just because they know how to win and they know what to do, puts 2-3 goals on Sounders and puts them in a terrible spot coming home.
Could absolutely happen. And it's the type of thing where you need to, they need to go out and play the game, right? You need to go out and play the game and win the game. But this is a team, Sounders. They're not as new, right? So like when LAFC was making that run, I guess it was 2 years ago. Last year was atrocious, but 2 years ago, there was still like an element for me about like, look, this team just got started, right? Like when we saw this team before LAFC, it was Chivas and they were abject. right? Like so,
Don't say that too loudly. You're gonna upset LAFC fans if you.
I'm sorry. Look, like we I know you rebranded. I know you're called your Chivas. Like let's just be honest about what we're doing here. Yes, I am an LA Galaxy fan. Why do you ask?
Yeah.
But like just to be clear, like there was no like sentiment that like this is a winning program, winning culture. Sounders do sort of have that, right? Like Sounders have been good to great since MLS existed.
Well, yeah, since they entered the league, and even prior to that, they've always been competitive. They're one of the few clubs in this country that has a domestic fan base that spans decades. I mean, there's Colin Cowherd will talk about that. He like grew up. He was a Sounders guy because he's from I think the Seattle area. Mm-hmm. I may be wrong, but he talked about. I remember back in like the 70s. Like that was like a thing for him. So that's an absolute rarity in this country. So there is like a winning culture. They had a good run last year in that Leagues Cup. They ended up losing in the final to Leon, they were like Leon won the league last year. They've had success against these clubs. I mean, they beat up on Leon again earlier in this tournament. Pretty. They won 3-0 at home, and it should have been 6 or 7. Yeah. Watching that game, so they have a path forward. They have players who are mature. I think that their coach. I think that they're going to go down there with the right mindset. But it's still just a matter of getting it done, and it is the next. In my mind, it really only is the next step that this league can take. You can keep filtering in additional money and trying to find ways to improve players on the field, and maybe you can attract a couple of additional internationals, where this will probably be the first World Cup where they'll probably have the best representation across multiple countries at this next World Cup. When you look at, we have quite a few internationals from South America playing. The more like
I can think of one off the top of my head from Africa, maybe 2.
Yeah, I mean Nuhu for sure.
Yeah.
And then you have some international players from more of the like auxiliary European countries, but the league quality is improving. But it's so hard to measure, and they are so far off from like watching like the Bayern Dortmund game or watching 2 of the top teams in the Premier League. Like there's such a gulf in spend and quality and culture. This regionally, the step you can take is win Champions League, show well when Mexican clubs are across the field from you. You're not going to win every game, but you've got to start making it a 50-50 tussle. And
I think the thing is that like you can look at Europe and you can see like there's a gulf forming between the top English clubs and everybody else.
Yeah.
And in terms of money and also quality, right? So I think that the step that MLS needs to take is they need to make that gulf obvious here, right? Like if you're in the Western Hemisphere and you want to get to the highest level in the Western Hemisphere is MLS. And you can't be the highest level in the Western Hemisphere until you are the highest level in North America, right? Like the steps are very clear. It's like you win this, then you start making an argument that the Argentinian teams and the Brazilian teams are not as good.
Right.
That's the next step.
That would be like 2026, 2027. We're winning Champions League here, and it starts becoming a discussion of what type or a hybrid Super League or tournament between a handful of MLS clubs and MX clubs. Then you go and you grab some folks from Libertadores, Sudamericana.
Right. You do some of not Club World Cup, but some version of that annually, where it's like a Super Champions League.
Right, and you host it in LA, and you sell out stadiums for weeks on end. Yeah. And this is, again, nothing that has happened, but it's somewhere that I think the league needs to get to. But right now, there's no objective reason why, if you were to have we're going to have a Champions League of Champions League in the Western Hemisphere, that you'd include an MLS team. Like there's no reason outside of money. And that's not what you want to be known for.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, sure. Of course, even if Monterrey Tigres and Club America were going to play like Boca, River, and Flamengo, they'd probably host it in LA or somewhere like that. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
So
or Dallas
South Florida,
Miami, whatever.
So you don't want to get in because of money. You need to get in because you win. There's a golden opportunity in front of this team, and they just need to seize it. If they don't do it now, I don't know what other like leading indicators or analysis you could do on the front end to say now this outcome will occur because of all these factors. Like right now, they kind of line up. Pumas' best, I think their striker, I believe, is out at least for League One. His name's like Dinero or Dineno.
Yeah.
Juan Dineno is out for the first leg. Like you don't want players to get hurt, but it's like another.
Everybody has to deal with
the
this.
game.
Yeah, everybody has to deal with the same stuff. And the reality is that look, would I love the first modern Champions League win to be over America's? Yeah, I would love that. That'd be great. But you gotta win first, right? Like for a long time, to use a different analogy, the Western Conference in the NBA was just like so far and away better, right? Like, and it's like you couldn't really make an argument until you started winning titles, right? And for I think like a decade, I mean the 2000s, it just wasn't there.
There's Lakers and Spurs.
Lakers, Spurs, and the Pistons stole one, but the rest of the time it was just getting blown out in the finals, and then the Miami team came around, and then suddenly then you were starting talking about something different. But right now, like if you remember that first Miami team, they beat the Thunder. They weren't the first title that the Heat won was against the Thunder. That Thunder team was not the best team in the West. They got hot and it worked and whatever. But then you start to see that parity come a little bit back between the two conferences in perception, if not in reality. And that's what we're talking about here, is that perception does in fact matter. So for our purposes, like the modern analogy that you have now is the SEC, right? Nobody can touch the SEC in college football. Well, it just takes one, right? Like Florida State, sort of did it. Ohio State sort of did it. You win another title, if you have I don't know, Michigan or Michigan State or Ohio State, it can't really be Ohio State, but if you have a Michigan or a Michigan State or an Oklahoma or Oregon go out and win a title, then it's like, well, okay, you can do it. And then you start stringing these together.
Right.
But you're not going to necessarily have Oregon or Michigan State beating Bama and Georgia. You need to get one of those random weird Auburn years, because you can take an Auburn, even the best Auburns you can take.
Yep.
And that's what Pumas is right now, right?
Yes.
Pumas is not Bama. Like you're not necessarily in a big game going to be able to go toe to toe with America or Tigres or Monterrey or whatever.
Yeah.
But you can go toe to toe with Pumas.
Right.
Over the course of 2 games. So I think we will have a little bit more about this next week. We will preview if Kevin's available. We'll preview the second leg as well. So I think the game is on FS1.
Yeah.
It's like late, right?
Let me see.
I wanted to say it was like 6 o'clock local, which means it's 9 o'clock Eastern.
It is at 8 p.m. and I believe that is adjusting for Mountain Time. So 7 p.m.
So 10 p.m. Eastern. Grow the game, MLS. Grow the game. As always, please like, subscribe, share. I've been your host, Asa. Please follow our socials. Kevin doesn't have any, but I do, at TLS_N_TDS. If you have any questions for the second leg, let us know. And otherwise, we'll see you next time.